This episode of What the Tech is brought to you by Molecule. Molecule is reimagining the future of clean air, starting with the air purifier. For 10% off your first air purifier, visit molecule.com. That's molekulE.com and enter the promo code Andrew10 at checkout. HelloFresh shops, plans, and delivers step-by-step recipes, pre-measured ingredients, so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. To get 9 free meals with HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com/WTT9 and use the code WTT9.
What the tech?
Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian, and I'm joined by, of course, the great, the wonderful Mr. Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
I don't know. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, actually. I'm having a good day. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Actually, I'm excited to do the show with you. I think this is a first for us because we were not doing a show for an entire decade. Last time the decade went over. I think we started doing the show in 2010 or 11 together. Probably 2011, I think. So we've been...
I have a hard time remembering that.
I know, it's crazy. But we've been covering technology together for over almost a decade now, and the decade's coming to a close. So I thought it would be a fun show for us to kind of go through some of these stories and big tech misses and tech hits and of the decade. Obviously, some of you guys could kind of predict what they're going to be. I mean, off the top of my head, I could probably throw a couple of them. I also have a couple curveballs that a lot of you guys may not think were as big innovators or huge stories of the decade, but I'm curious to see what Paul thinks. I want to know also from the chat room, we're doing this live, obviously, on Tuesday here, and I want to know from the chat room what they think were big tech moments of the decade. But, Paul, you're in New York this week, right? I'm going to see you on Thursday.
That's right.
What are you here for?
It's an HP event.
Those are always fun.
Yeah, I think it's like a pre-CES kind of thing.
Nice. You know what's funny? Do you think CES has the importance that it did 10 years ago?
No. Maybe that could be a story for the.
I think that is a story, right? But I think that kind of plays a part because I remember doing those CES shows with you. Like where we would just cover all the cool stuff from CES, and I feel like every year we cover that less and less.
You've heard the phrase, obviously, too big to fail. CES is like too big to matter anymore. It's just stupid, you know.
Yeah, I think Apple.
And I will say,
how to do one.
Yeah, I don't want to go to Vegas, but it would be worth it for me personally to go to Vegas just to meet with PC and device makers for one day and then get out of there, like skip the show floor, but that doesn't make a lot of sense financially and whatever. Yeah. And, you know, most of what their people are announcing, you can cover remotely. So
also, a lot of the stuff that they're announcing is no longer important to be announced at CES. Before, almost every manufacturer was announcing something tremendous there. Every year there were devices that were going to come out in 6 months or a year.
Well, you know what it is, though? And this factors into the conversation we're about to have. Because any conversation about, you know, the biggest tech of the past decade has to include the smartphone maybe as number one, you know. And I think that transition kind of made CES less interesting. There are no major smartphone announcements at CES because Mobile World Congress is a month later.
Yeah.
And that kind of relegates it to PC, which is not particularly interesting to most people. You know, the smart home stuff and automotive and, you know, home like hi-fi and theater and that kind of thing. But
how about this? How about the fact that everybody does a huge tech announcement twice a year now? Microsoft has numerous announcements. Apple, Samsung. Yep. I mean, the ones that really matter have their own. They don't.
Yeah, because they want to message their own announcements on their time schedule, right? Back when Steve Jobs was still around, and Apple did, like, I think it was a twice yearly Macworld, which was actually an IDC show, if I'm not mistaken. It certainly wasn't owned by Apple, regardless. They didn't like having to conform to that schedule, you know, and I think it was January and then I don't know, summertime, something like that. So now Apple does their own thing, and Samsung, like you said, does their own thing. Microsoft does their own thing. But most of these companies, Amazon does their own thing. You know, like Google does Yeah, and so I don't know, those things. There are still waves of releases for different types of products. PCs. There will be new PCs announced at CES. I mean, that will be part of it. That's the little part of it I might be personally interested in. But there are PC announcements in the fall at IFA. There are smartphone announcements all year long. Depending on different schedules.
It's fascinating. I mean, it is an interesting thing where that has kind of taken a back seat in a way.
Yeah.
To what everybody else is doing, but obviously there's still so much going on, and obviously I want to talk about a lot of this. Before we continue, Paul, I know this is going to be a really fun show, and I do want to talk about something that's really fun, and that's HelloFresh. You're a big cooker. You love to cook. I think you and I have spoken.
I'm often cooked. Is that what you're saying?
You are cooked. You've been cooked for the past decade, Paul. That's what it is.
Yes.
But your wife, you enjoy.
Is this an intervention, Andrew?
This is how I begin talking about HelloFresh. Paul, you've been cooked for about 10 years, but you enjoy. You and your wife enjoy cooking together, which I'm a big fan of that too. It's a moment for me where I get my glass of wine and we start cooking something different. Something totally different than what we normally is in our realm, and HelloFresh totally helps with that. And this is something amazing. HelloFresh does the shopping for you. They do the planning, and they also deliver step-by-step recipes and instructions on how to make this with pre-measured ingredients. That makes it really fun. And like, how many times and this is a big problem for me. Like, I don't keep a lot of the like the specialty sauces in my house. Like, if I don't have oyster, like oyster sauce, or I don't have, a sesame oil and things like that. And it kind of sucks when you have all the ingredients and you want to make something different and you can't do it because you got to now go to the store to buy an entire container of this thing, which you're only going to use once over the next year. What HelloFresh does is they put all of that in there. So everything is pre-measured. Everything is great. So you could cook together, eat, and then enjoy your meal together. And here's a great offer they have for you guys. And this is actually unbelievable. You get 9 free meals with HelloFresh when you go to HelloFresh.com/WTT9. That's HelloFresh.com/WTT9. And you use the code WTT9 when you check out. And all these recipes take under 30 minutes for me, generally, when I'm making it, which is awesome. And it's super flexible. So depending on how many times you cook at home, you could maybe do X amount per week where you get your HelloFresh orders, or you could do less if you want. You could also change it back to back. You could skip a meal. They have a family plan. They have a vegetarian plan. I try to do the family plan because I got so many people I got to feed, like my kids. Paul, who nobody warned me it's expensive to feed kids. Nobody gave me that warning.
You know what? I think there's a little Schadenfreude here where parents who are up on like the expense of children just gleefully watch other people make the same mistake.
Yeah.
Just so they can enjoy it.
Yeah. So I always opt in for the family meals with them guys. Jesus, I'm losing my mind with those guys. The family recipes, you could do vegetarian, or you could do their whole menu series like the Hall of Fame and the craft burgers, which I absolutely love. These guys are unbelievable. I'm a big fan of HelloFresh, and the fact that a lot of my friends now subscribe to it, it's awesome when we talk about what meals we got, which I love. HelloFresh.com/WTT9. Use the code WTT9 and get 9 free meals, which is unbelievable. I want to thank HelloFresh for supporting the show, and hopefully they continue to support us in 2020. Let's talk about 2020. The decade's over, Paul. Time's over. The show's done. I'll see you next time, okay? It's over. Let's talk about some of the big moments from early on in the year, in the decade.
Hey, before we do that, real quick.
Yeah.
So I, when you asked me about this topic, like doing this today, I sort of said, I was like, yeah, of course, that sounds good. And then I literally didn't do any research at all. So just as we were starting the show,
which is a way we like to do the shows, by the way.
Yeah,
we like to put as little
coming in hot, But I thought this was kind of interesting because I came up with a PC World article from 10 years ago that talked about the previous 10 years.
Oh my God, let's do it.
And this is kind of fascinating because of how different things are today. I'm not going to read all of them because some of them might factor into what we're going to talk about.
Do you have that article?
Sure.
Now,
I'll send it to you, but I'm coming from the bottom of it because I actually don't like the order they did this in.
So it's up to 2000s, correct?
Yeah, from 2000 through 2009.
Okay.
So a lot of it's like Microsoft focus, right? Like Gates leaves Microsoft. You know, um, the social networking and the battle for Facebook. Vista delays. Windows Vista. Like, really? You know, the rise of Google. HP merges with Compaq. I bet nobody even remembers that.
But you know what? That kind of plays into the PC industry essentially getting smaller and smaller amongst the big guys
Yep.
And then you had the introduction of guys like Acer and Asus coming to the game.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's an interesting story. It doesn't have anything to do with the past decade in a way, but that is actually an interesting story because it's sort of like when Microsoft dropped the Nokia phone business. The companies that had been doing this for a long time had built up a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of expense involved with that, and they weren't as fast moving or as agile as smaller companies. And so, like, I think companies like Acer and Asus and forgetting some names here. Sorry, there's a couple of others who kind of smaller PC makers who came in on the side. Maybe some of them used to be like ODMs that used to design PCs for the bigger companies, are able to kind of operate with less overhead. It's kind of interesting. So, by the way, sorry, just two more real quick.
No, go through it because I have it open.
Oh, okay. What's that?
I have the page open, so this is an awesome list.
Well, no, I don't want to spend I just want to go through it quickly. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason to stand on the mountain and die here. It's just interesting because it's a lot of Microsoft stuff. Apple launches the iPod, and then the whole .com boom and bust, right? Which I think we just kind of forget about this stuff. Like, it's funny.
It's gone because it's so big now. The .com boom happened again, even better.
Yeah. So like I think if someone were like these guys probably did something like this or are going to do something like this for the subsequent decade, I don't think Microsoft plays much of a role at all in that, like they did in that previous decade. I think that was their swan song pretty much.
Yeah. Interesting. I have another one that's the best gadgets, devices. This is actually hysterical to look at. All those Bluetooth earpieces. That's gone. That didn't exist this decade. The Griffin.
Did I tell you?
Trip.
I used to go to this gym in Boston around Dedham, and so this would have been 10 more years ago. I don't remember, but the guy who ran the gym used to always show up. We were in like a trench coat, and he had like one of those Bluetooth, the big ones, the big knob thing. And I'd be like, I said to him one day, I was like, "Where did you just come from? The Matrix?"
He's such an ass.
I just,
I have to tell you, you are a jerk.
He asked me one time. He was really involved with all the like the local town stuff. He was because he's like a local businessman and everything. And he said, "Are you involved in the town at all?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Do you like participate in chamber of commerce stuff or whatever?" And I'm like, "No, I pay taxes." I was like, that's the extent of my involvement in this town.
No, so let me, let me touch on this a little bit, okay? Some of the devices that we no longer talk about. The iPod, gone from this decade.
Yep.
Right? TiVo DVR.
Actually, real quick, though, let me ask you, and I think anyone listening to this, I still see this. You go to a hotel. It could be like a Hyatt, I think, has these. Any hotel. You'll see like an alarm clock that has like an iPod connector on it.
The old one, the 30-pin.
Yeah, like the old, like whatever that was called, the wide one. Really strange. Like it's amazing how quickly that stuff came and went.
Well, it because we're proprietary nonsense, right? That's the amazing thing.
Yeah, no, I know, but they moved. Apple moved right past it, and they kind of stranded an entire generation of peripherals.
Yeah, this is actually fascinating. I'm looking at a different list, and I'll go through this really quickly. TiVo DVR.
Yeah,
came out in 99, 2000. Unnecessary, right? And it's an
totally
extinct product. How about the Griffin GPS? All those GPSs, the TomToms and the Garmin. GPS, Garmin GPS. Standalone GPS is gone. This one's obviously they show the Wii and the Kindle. The Amazon Kindle still around. That survived.
It did, but it's kind of a niche device in a way, right? Because everyone has turned to what has to be the number one item on our list, right? The smartphone / iPhone.
The iPhone
has to be number one. It's the Uber device. It's the thing everyone has. It does everything. It has replaced so many things.
Everything. Slingbox gone. BlackBerry non-existent from 2000. I mean, 2002 would have been their peak. Non-existent. Xbox 2002 still a key player. Microsoft is really Still, I mean,
Yeah.
let me pull back here. PlayStation 3, obviously. This is fascinating. The Airport Express, the Apple Airport Express.
Oh,
Was
that's a nonsense edition.
This is a nonsense edition.
Apple gets too much credit for stuff they didn't do anything
How
with.
about
They
this
didn't
one?
innovate in Wi-Fi. They didn't.
Wait a minute. They didn't innovate Wi-Fi? I thought they did.
Well, I mean, Apple likes to take credit for things. Like we removed the floppy first. We added Wi-Fi first or something, even though they didn't, or whatever it is. Like they don't get all of those. Like whatever, everyone Wi-Fi, whatever.
A flip video camera. Those were really big. I remember that.
But what about GoPro? If for some reason is still kind of a thing.
Still kind of a thing. USB flash drives. That was from the 2000s.
I still have a couple flash drives I use from time to time.
I use tons of them.
Yeah.
Tons of them. So, I mean, this list goes on, and there's obviously you can see that a lot of the technology has changed. That decade, the previous decade, would have been the last of the wired connected devices.
Well, actually, here's an interesting way to look at it. The big, well, it's not the biggest, but Windows XP, which was released in October 2001, had half a dozen or a dozen big innovations, big things. One of them was Wi-Fi. It was integrated Wi-Fi capabilities. And back then, Wi-Fi networks were by and large unprotected. It would just connect automatically to any network that it could find. That was shown to be a huge problem, But over the next, over that 10-year period, that's when that transition to wireless happened. And when you emerge on the other end of it, and look at the decade we're going to look at, I mean, it's all wireless.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway from the previous one. But we'll go back and forth, obviously, in comparison of two. Sure. What stands out. But if I were to ask, I mean, I have a little list here that I made.
Yeah, I do too.
So I'm going to ask you, when you talk about the 2010s, there and I'm not saying this is the device of the decade, right? I'm not saying that per se, but when I think about a device that represented the 2010s, I would say it's the iPod, the iPad.
Really? See, I would not say that.
That would be and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm not saying due to importance. Yes, it had a tremendous important part of technology and the way that it shifted. But that is what comes to mind when I think the 2010s and an important device and something that kind of it stays in my head to represent that decade. I would say the iPad would have been the one for me that stands out as a very 2010s device.
Wow. See, I completely disagree with that. Okay. And
tell me why.
I actually have two short lists, and one of them is a list of just a couple of things that I think were humongous in that decade and have long-reaching ramifications. They are pivots in time where it will never be the same again. But then I have another list where these things happened and they didn't take over the world, but I still think they're important, and I think they're going to head there. And I think the iPad is on that list because it was announced and released in 2010. It's literally, no, not literally, but will be soon, literally 10 years later. It wasn't the only, no, you know what? See, I can't even say it. I was going to say, you can make the argument that it knocked 1/3 of the size of the PC market away, but actually, I don't think it did. I think the iPhone did most of it. That's the thing. I think that's why the iPhone is it for me, because, and when I say the iPhone, I really mean the smartphone, but the iPhone being the first modern smartphone and then everyone else following suit.
Well, the iPhone of the 2010s was which one? It was the iPhone 4. That would have been a very important player, right?
Well, no. So
the 4 and the 4S.
If you go back to 2009, the iPhone had been out for 2 years. It was only on a couple of carriers still.
Yeah.
They had only released a couple models. They had just started the App Store the year before. It wasn't yet destroying the PC market. It wasn't yet taking over for Apple as its biggest moneymaker. It wasn't yet a humongous success. That all happened in the subsequent 10 years. And then, of course, Android took it to other heights as well. There were battles. This was the decade during which RIM and BlackBerry, Nokia, Motorola, although they're still kind of around, Palm, all disappeared, basically, because of the iPhone. And when you look at Apple today, compared to where they were 10 years ago, 70-something% of their revenues are from iPhone. I mean, it's the biggest economic engine that's ever been created in some ways. So the iPad to me is just an obvious follow on to that, and it hasn't definitely not had the same impact, but it's on that other list because I think it's still like long term. It is that car versus truck thing. I think it's the type of device that's probably going to be good enough or something like it for most people, where the PC becomes more like a workstation.
Well, here's kind of the reason why, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that it plays. I'm not saying it's an I do feel that on the level of importance,
It's just a giant iPod. What's wrong with you?
I know it's just a giant. Wasn't that what you said when it came out?
Oh yeah.
The reason why I think that it has a real importance to the previous decade or the decade that just is ending is that aesthetically, it really changed the way we look at these type of devices. It played a very important part in the evolution of all of essentially the entire PC industry with, having a slick metal look to something became the norm. And I think everybody else followed. And the fact that it was the only one out of all the tablets that survived. There was no tablet market. There's a PC market and there's an iPad market. Yeah. That's how I see this. Samsung couldn't do it. Google couldn't do it. No other OEM could do it. They were able to do it because they had the infrastructure. They have the ecosystem. And I don't consider the PC tablets because they're PCs at the end of the day. So It was able to compete in a non-existent market that they created and nobody else could follow. I think the long-term thing about the iPad, there's going to be a much bigger story here. I think if it wasn't for the iPad, we wouldn't have devices like the Echo Show. We wouldn't have devices like the Google Hub. I think the iPad made way for that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not 100% sure I agree with all of that, but I will say that let's pretend everything you said is true.
Agree with me.
Let's just say everything you said is true. But none of it is true unless the iPhone happens first, and I think the iPhone is the more important device by far.
Oh no, absolutely. Listen, the evolution of the iPhone is the big story here. The longevity of the iPhone is the big story here because when that iPhone came out, first of all, I held off from getting an iPhone. You know this, and I've discussed this over the last 10 years. I did not want an iPhone to be my everyday phone. It was not my everyday driver. I needed to stay out of that ecosystem because I knew it's so deep that once you go in it, it's difficult to come back out.
Yep.
It really is.
It's what I call a one-way dead-end road.
It really is. It's the people that are able to do that jump from Android to iPhone. I don't know how they do that back and forth because...
Well, from your experience with me that I do it poorly.
Well, you do it because of work.
You'll send me a text message and it will end up on an iPad somewhere, even though I switched back to an Android phone. And, that's one of those things that happens. Like it's hard. The Apple makes it hard on purpose.
Here's where I fall on this. And then for some reason, all my applications just opened up. I think the computer knows I'm talking about Apple and it's getting upset. I think that's what just happened. When you think about phones, what phone stands out in the decade for you? Right now, top of your head. If I'm saying the 2010s, boom.
I would just say iPhone.
You know what I go to? iPhone 5. iPhone 5.
Oh, you mean a specific?
Specific phone that represents that era.
See, I think of it as more of a continuum. The thing that's fascinating about the iPhone was so much. I mean, honestly, we could spend the entire show just talking iPhone. Like one of the reasons that iPhone is so interesting is when it started, the iPhone was all about innovation and Apple was first. They were doing stuff first. By the time the decade ended, Apple was like not even a fast follower. They were a slow follower. Like Apple became the safe company and they wouldn't adopt technologies until they had completely nailed the user experience. Like they have typically been lagging behind. Like we see that the latest example is with the move to 5G. I mean, they're just, it's just the nature of it. So that shows you like how the iPhone matured over that period of time. I think, the iPhone 4 was a disaster from a reliability perspective, but it's also an enduring design. And I think it was Steve Jobs who kind of compared it to like a Leica camera, if I'm not mistaken. And there's something to be said for that. It's actually hard to hold it in your hand because it's so sharp edged. And of course now it's tiny, but so it's ludicrously small, but there's something about that design, which is iconic. And the iPhone 5 you're referencing is basically a taller version of that, shared that design. Yes, I mean, iconic. I think they lost it a little. They lost the script a bit with the iPhone 6. I think those were kind of soft looking and not so interesting. And, the iPhone 10, I mean, we can kind of debate, the pros and cons of that design, but the bigger trend there, which other companies are doing better, is the move to these all screen devices where literally the front of the device is just a screen. The camera maybe pops up or it's hidden under the glass or whatever it is. It's a fingerprint reader in the glass, or they use a camera for that kind of sign-in stuff. Anyone who was familiar with the first gen iPhone would look at a modern smartphone and immediately understand what it was, but it is amazing how much those things have improved.
No, I agree with you
over
100%. Yeah, they have tremendously. Let's see, what else do you have? So I have another one on my list, and and again, maybe this is not a popular opinion. I think the Surface Pro 3.
Oh, you're really specific. You're like going right on specific models.
Yeah, I'm going very specific with my list.
You seem to have your weird tablet obsession here for some reason.
I think it was the decade of the tablet. I think it made a huge. Yeah. I think it made a huge impact on the way that we use computers. Listen,
so I will give you.
I have a monstrous laptop here, but most people have a very thin, ultra portable device, and
right.
Surface played a huge part in that.
Yeah. So again, I would, rather than be specific enough to a certain device, the way I look at this is the past 10 years have also been an interesting period for innovative form factors for PCs, right? And there's a bunch of different things. Like I think Microsoft with the Surface Pro 3 didn't really invent, but formalized that kind of tablet-based convertible PC design, which everyone copied. So obviously it's a big deal. I think you have to talk about the MacBook Air 2nd gen and how an entire generation of Ultrabooks appeared because of that computer. There's some all-in-one designs I think that are really iconic. The iMac is an obvious example, but also something like the Surface Studio, which I realize hasn't sold particularly well, but the ability to grab the screen, pull it down, write on it, and everything, use the dial. It's it's incredible.
Yeah.
Multi-touch and pen kind of came into their own this decade everywhere except on the back. That's interesting, and I think the impact of the iPad and or the iPhone on the PC market can be seen in ways that we brought ideas forward from there, but also that a market that hadn't been innovating for a while suddenly realized they had to innovate to survive, and we reap the benefits as users of that. So I think, the PC market literally over that decade fell by 1/3, like 30%, 33% of it disappeared, right? So it's a smaller market, but the quality of the machines we have today and the quality of the systems we run, whether it's Mac OS or Linux or Windows, much higher than it was 10 years ago, much higher.
Yeah, overall build quality. What do you think attributed to that? Do you think it was the fact that we've had almost a reference device by Microsoft and by even Apple for other OEMs?
No, I think there was an understanding on the PC side of the fence. It's always been a very low margin business. And what PC makers finally came to understand was something that Apple came to understand first was premium devices have higher margins and they can sell well enough to be a very successful business. And so HP has done a great job with their premium PCs. Microsoft basically only sells premium PCs. There are a few exceptions. Dell has premium PCs. Lenovo, obviously, the ThinkPad, especially the X1 line. Those are the, there's that's the part of the market that they can actually make money in. Gaming PCs is another example. And then Acer this past year has been innovating in a kind of a new area around premium PCs for creative types, where it's basically, we want all the power of a gaming PC, but none of the noise and the fans and the stupid designs with all the lights and everything. Like, we want something professional aimed at that particular market. So I just think it's and the market's falling. And so, we talked about HP Compact. That was kind of at the beginning of this. Actually, it was right before the market collapsed.
Well, how about HP's big mistake of the decade? They wanted to leave the PC business.
Yeah, that guy didn't last very long.
Yeah,
that was. I think he was. I can almost come up with his name. It was Lou something, or he was only there briefly. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
Yeah, it was
For
okay
me,
standard.
there's a bunch of devices that stand out. I think
Hmm.
the ease of use, obviously, 4G,
Yep.
it made the concept that
And
you have
4G is a
wireless.
stepping stone to 5G, right? Which is going to be maybe one of the. Well, we'll see what happens, obviously. But I mean, standing here on the cusp of the next century, the next decade, it's it seems like this is the start. You know, we talked about wireless before this past decade. That wireless was really mostly about Wi-Fi, and now it's just global, pervasive, high-speed wireless. It's better than Wi-Fi.
Oh, you know what it is? So here's the thing: you had Wi-Fi, and then you had the 4G boom, which was true high-speed mobile internet, right? Where
Right.
anywhere you go.
Hmm.
The 5G story is not going to be the speed of 5G. I don't think that's the story of 5G. I think the accessibility is going
Yeah.
to be, and I don't accessibility in the sense that you have access to it, not the other
Well, I mean,
accessibility. But the fact that you're going to have Internet of Things is going to become a key player in everything that we do because you're going to have
well,
access to 5G.
I mean, one of the items I have on my list that I think was the one of the big technologies of this decade is tied to this, the cloud computing, and we can kind of get into that. But for cloud computing to work, you have to have pervasive wireless, right? I mean, you have to have broadband. It's that otherwise it doesn't make sense. And when I think of 5G, I what I think of is on 4G, a lot of people will stream music all the time. They don't think about it; it just works. And on 5G, the scenario is you're standing in line to board a plane and you're like, oh, I forgot to download a movie. And you just download it while you're standing in line. And it happens that fast, And that may not be a great or common scenario, or whatever, a great example. But what it's indicative of is how everything changes when something like that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of hard to imagine, but cloud computing happened because of pervasive connectivity. What will happen because of pervasive 5G level connectivity? It's kind of hard, obviously more cloud computing, but I mean, it may be hard to imagine. 10 years ago, 10 years ago, we were still arguing over whether cloud computing had a future.
I think we've done that conversation.
Yeah.
We've had that conversation on the air. And for long-time listeners, we have evolved. For people that say Paul is stuck in his ways, I'm going to tell you, this was a man. Him and I would have entire shows about how we were, we were tagging our MP3s and storing our video.
I got to tell you a story about this.
Even, I have to tell you something. I disconnected my home server that I've had up and running. I mean, I've upgraded, but since 2005, I've had a server in my house.
Right.
For photos, for documents, for media, for everything. And it's gone. I took it off. I don't need it anymore. I
still have mine.
You do?
I don't use it for anything.
I know.
I mean, I back up stuff to it.
Disconnecting it is the big
for example, I mean, think about I could look at it right now, and I don't have to actually look at it, but there's a folder on there for photos or pictures or whatever, and you go in, there's like a photo collection folder. I have all the photos I've ever scanned, all the photos I ever took through a certain time. But, in the last few years, all the photos I've been taking are on smartphones. Those things are backed up automatically to OneDrive and to Google Photos. And sometimes I'll remember if I'm decommissioning a phone, I'll just offload the photos and throw them in there.
Yeah.
But I just went this past weekend, I made our Christmas card. That required me to go back and look at all the photos from the past year, and which I did, by the way, on Google Photos. And I had to go find the template I used to create the card, which was on the NAS. So I actually just accessed my NAS for the first time in forever.
Just for that.
And I don't have any photos from 2019. Basically, I actually have a handful, but the 2019 folder is empty because it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
The world has changed.
The world has really changed, and I think cloud computing that's become the discussion 10 years ago. We were doing the show. We would have been, how many terabytes do we need on our computers? Now the discussion is, I could get away with 256 and I'm good.
I could get away with 128.
128?
I very much could.
Yeah.
I use so many different computers every year because I review them and so forth, and I know exactly what I put on each system. Everything I do is in the cloud. Everything. I do this every day, Andrew. I mean, work on this computer I'm using right now in my office. I'll go upstairs, open a laptop. I go to the folder I have all my stuff in I'm working on, bring up a document that I was working on. This happens every day. It does not matter what computer I have. If I get a new computer, the time from opening it for the first time to I'm fully up and running has dropped to under an hour.
Amazing.
And by fully up and running, I mean all my apps are installed, all my data is synced, everything I need is there. When I go to New York on Thursday, I don't know exactly which laptop I'm going to bring, but I can tell you this, I'm not going to do anything special to make it ready. I don't have to. It's all set. It doesn't matter which one I take. It's amazing.
So cloud computing for sure. The story of 5G is going to unveil the next decade, which is interesting.
That's
4G for sure. Streaming media.
Yes.
Would you say that that's probably the top?
I think of it as the death of physical media, right? I don't know. For example, maybe you know more about this than I do, but audio CDs were a big thing, right? And they were they were the end of the line for physical media for music. Even though I know there were other formats, it doesn't matter. And I also know that some hipsters like to play turntables, whatever. Who cares? So the music is relatively low bandwidth compared to movies, right? So movies, TV shows, it's kind of a problem. I know that Blu-ray discs offer still quality that you can't get streaming, apparently, but I don't think most people care. I also don't think most people need to own things, and that there are incredible vast libraries of content now available via, dozens and dozens of services, for everything from the Netflix type services that everyone has heard of, to the cord cutting services, to specialty services like Shudder if you're a horror fan, or Disney Plus if you have kids and like kid content. There's all kinds of it's stuff for everybody. And the days when people used to have bookshelves full of books and CDs and cassettes and VHS tapes and DVDs and blah blah blah. It's not 100% gone. Obviously, I know the people that hold out for that stuff, but this is the decade that all that's just swirling around the toilet. It's just
the fact that
all going away.
The fact that we now, even early 2010s, right? The discussion was cord cutting. What are you going to do? Cord. It's not about and the concept was that you don't want to pay your cable bill anymore. That's not
okay.
That's what people wanted.
But so here's what's happened. I literally just wrote my year-end roundup about cord cutting. In some ways, cord cutting had a tough year in 2019, right? PlayStation Vue is disappearing. One of the top tier players. The prices have gone up multiple times because of the increased price of content, and also the same kind of bundling we see that screws over cable is occurring on these services. And then now there's complexity. Unfortunately, there's almost too many of these services. It's not just the TV services, it's all of the services. And so most people who want to cut the cord are going to have some combination of services, some number of services, and the number of them has gone up. It's kind of tough. Like if you want to watch like the new Star Trek show, you have to get CBS All Active or All Access, whatever it's called. If you want to watch Game of Thrones, you got to have HBO. Well, not anymore, but at the time you had to have HBO Now or HBO Go or whatever. These things, they add up. They can be expensive. And I've gotten this complaint from so many people because I've written so much about cord cutting who have said, I was so excited to get rid of cable. I got YouTube TV, or I got Direct TV Now, or I got PS View, whatever it was. And it was, when I got it, it was $35 a month, and then it was $40 a month, and it was 45, and then it was 50, and now it's 55. And it's like, basically, it's getting to the point where these things could cost as much as cable. So why bother, right? And the answer is, and maybe that's how cord cutting changed over the course of the decade, because cord cutting is just like anything else; it's inevitable. Our viewing habits have completely changed, or are in the process of changing. There's always going to be the old school people who like to show up in front of the TV with the remote and turn it on at 8:00 on Thursday and watch Friends or whatever. But hopefully not today. But the thing that saves cord cutting, the thing that makes cord cutting make sense, and will always make cord cutting make sense, is just the flexibility that you can go in and out of any of these services at any time without any repercussions. And if you're smart about it, if you don't mind a little bit hands-on management, you can say, this month, we're going to pay for Netflix. We're going to watch the hell out of Netflix. That's all we're going to do.
Yeah.
And when it's over, or maybe it's 2 months, whatever the time, it doesn't matter. We're going to cancel it, and we're going to do Hulu, or we're going to do Disney, or we're going to do Apple TV Plus, or we're going to do HBO Go, whatever it is, and we're going to watch the hell out of that thing, and then we're going to get rid of it. Or this new season of Homeland's coming in February. We're going to get Showtime that month, and by the way, those things are often free for like the first week. This past year, my wife and I watched the then new season of Homeland for free, and then got rid of the service because we don't really want Showtime. So even, yes, the prices have gone up. It's bad. But cord cutting is here to stay, and this flexibility is what puts it over the top.
Yeah, no, I think the flexibility is the selling point here. But like, for example, like I have YouTube TV. They're the number one. Not only in my opinion, but I'm talking about quality. They're the number one live video, like as if it's cable streaming content. As far as quality goes, $55 a month. You know what? Now I'm like,
I know.
I don't want to pay $55 a month for this. And to be honest, the only thing I watch on there is wrestling regularly.
Yes, but you know what, Andrew? That's
all I'm watching regularly.
But so eventually, I suspect if you are a fan of wrestling in this case, or maybe you're a fan of the NFL or a fan of NBA basketball or whatever it is, the sports in general, you either can now or soon will be able to just pay for something that gives you that, And I think this is the viewing change I meant. So remember when cable TV arrived, probably in the 1970s or 80s, depending on where you lived, the big deal was the amount of channels you got, because before then we had at least in Boston, we had three, what do you call them? VHF channels. Like I'm confusing them, VHF channels, and then maybe 2 or 3 on UHF. And that was it. We had like 5 or 6 channels. Yeah. Cable arrived and we had like 100. It was amazing. Yeah. MTV, all this stuff. The bigger, just as big of an advance though was the ability to record this stuff, and you could start watching shows on your own schedule, right? But shows still came out once a week. If you watch the X-Files back in the 90s, it was Friday night or Sunday night, I don't remember, whatever night, show would come on, there'd be commercials. If you taped it and watched it later, you could fast forward through that stuff. The other thing about cord cutting services, things like Netflix, especially whatever, is they'll drop an entire season of a show or some set of episodes, whatever it is, at once. And this is a cliff you can't step back from. Like once you go down this path, the notion of a show that is on live TV on a Thursday is ludicrous. The notion of a show that comes out online, like The Handmaid's Tale, where they actually release one episode every week, nope, ludicrous. Like that has to change. Like that will change. And I think that this is a one-way trip. We're not ever going back to the old way of doing things. It's only going to be more of this. And I realize Disney just came out, and Mandalorian comes out once a week, and Apple TV stuff comes out once a week.
As someone that's in ads and marketing, I would say that there is more value in a product when you release it weekly rather than dumping everything at the same time. I
Netflix
think
would disagree with you.
Netflix does. No, Netflix does disagree, but they don't have ads on their shows.
Right.
There's no advertising on Netflix, and their entire model is
that's how this model is going to change, right? In other words,
but what happens when they cap out? When they're capped, and they're seeing that there's an issue. You know what? What if you released a series with a limited, a sponsored by weekly?
Okay, but remember, like go back to the days of cable. Go back to the must-see TV Thursday night thing, right? Thursday night, if I remember correctly, I think it was like Friends and
Seinfeld.
And then there were 2 other shows.
Mad About You.
Depending on the year, they were usually crap, but sometimes they were okay. And if they were really good, they would probably separate them out and put them somewhere else on the schedule because they need those tentpole shows to attract. But there would always be the crap. The beauty of the Netflix model is you can only watch the good stuff. And if you start down a path where like, oh, this series isn't that good, you just move on. That's what I mean. I feel like as a viewer, you can't go back from that. It's just too good. Now, obviously, something like Netflix, when they get humongous, not every show can be as good as Narcos. Not every show is going to be as good as, what else do they make? I don't know, whatever their other great shows are. Like it's like when you watch the first couple of like European or English crime dramas like Broadchurch or something, you're like, holy crap, this is amazing. They're all going to be this good. No, they're not. Like they're, you saw the best one, unfortunately. Of course, that's the one they give us first. But I think one of the nice benefits of what has happened, and it's still transitioning, it's still happening, is just the quality of TV has gone up dramatically. We used to basically have to turn to HBO to watch The Sopranos or Deadwood or Rome or whatever those great shows they had were. And now those kinds of shows, those level of shows, they're on Amazon, they're on Hulu, they're on Netflix. Disney and Apple are trying. We'll see how that goes. But it's what an amazing switch over that is. I don't have to watch Alf anymore, or Mork and Mindy, or Laverne and Shirley, or whatever. I don't have to watch like crap. I have a choice now, and I think a lot of people are going to choose quality.
It is quality and it helps. I'm curious to see how we get out of this decade when it comes to content. Listen, here's the other thing. Another big story of this, and this is something that I do. Mm-hmm. I stream on all these services. This was very difficult to do 10 years ago, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're able to, you're sending an HD signal to me, and I'm able to kind of put this together, and I built a studio in my house, and we're now streaming on a number of platforms, and you have the Twitch streaming happening, and you have all these services happening.
Yeah.
I think this is a huge story.
This is off the top of my head, so I'm gonna get some of these details wrong, and I don't remember the year, but when Apple came out with something that was called, it was like the iPod, with photos or something.
iPod video.
That? It was before they could do photos. It was color. It had a color screen. You could look at photos on it, and then eventually they added video too. They added to the iTunes store the ability to buy and rent TV shows.
Oh yeah.
And at the time, the only way you could get it on a TV was to buy a dock for that iPod that would connect to your TV with probably RCA cables. The TV content that you bought from Apple that first year was 320 by 240. It was, I don't know if it was before H.264. I think it was. It might have even been, I don't remember the format. I guess that part doesn't matter. Yeah, it was MPEG-4 of some kind, probably, whatever it was. The quality was terrible. The show, it was the year that Lost debuted. And I remember that because I bought the first episode of Lost
2007?
So I could take screenshots and test it. And I actually became hooked on Lost because I watched the intro to Lost several times in the process of recording what it looked like. And of course, the first episode, Lost, was like a movie. It was incredible. But I mean, that's how much things have changed. I mean, when you buy content from Apple today, I don't know TV shows per se, but most of the movies you're going to buy today, the new movies, are going to be 4K, UHD, HDR. You buy them with a remote on your Apple TV, and away you go. And it just starts this special features. They're not alone in all that. Of course, I know it's not just Apple, but I mean, when you think about that, 320 by 240, it's like the resolution of a postage stamp, compared to like 3840 by whatever it is, 2160, whatever 4K is. I mean, it's incredible. It's more than 10. It's a 15x resolution increase or something like that. It's crazy.
What else do you have on your list? Anything else?
The other big thing I have, and I don't know if the right term for this is gig economy. I think it is, but it's the Airbnb, Uber, Lyft type stuff, the sharing economy.
Yeah.
I realize that from a business plan perspective, there are some issues here. I realize that there are absolutely some safety issues in all of those things I just mentioned, for sure. But this is going to transform the world. You live in New York City, and so you understand how taxis work. I mean, a lot of people in other part of the countries might not, but I knew a guy who owned a taxi, and I knew the crazy hoops you had to jump to get into this business and the expense of getting that badge that goes on your car. It's like you're buying your way into the mafia. And whatever you think of, Bob has a Sentra, and now he can drive people around in his own car. I really feel like this stuff is going to fundamentally change the way that these markets work.
Where do you see it headed? How do you see that evolving beyond what we have?
So, I mean, obviously there's been challenges around, well, two things, like I said, safety and money, right? And so a lot of people kind of scoff at a company like Uber or Lyft and think like this thing is not sustainable. I actually wonder how it's not sustainable. To me, it seems like it's obviously sustainable, but I mean, whatever the reality is. I look at this like these businesses, Airbnb and Lyft, Uber, etc. Whether or not they are successful in their own right will still have massive ramifications on the markets they compete in, right? And I think basically it's just going to impact the quality, the cost, and the availability of the other options, right? And so I don't know. You probably know this. I mean, I don't know how it works in New York City, but I know when we go to Europe, for example, there's an app we can get for taxis, and it works just like Uber and Lyft, right? Except that what you're calling is a taxi. But it's the same thing. Like, I mean, how would you hail a taxi if you wanted to take a taxi from your home in suburban Queens,
Okay.
and go to the airport? You would call someone on a phone.
You would call a cab
Right?
service. Yeah.
Well, maybe
you,
not today.
yeah.
You wouldn't, but I mean, 5-10 years ago, you would.
Yeah,
Today,
I would call the cab
You
company.
would actually get on a phone and make a phone call like an Amish person. And like today there's an app for that. There's an app for that. And
I still stick my leg out on the side of the highway to catch a ride. That's how I do. That's how I hail a cab.
Yep. I think that stuff is huge, and it's ongoing. We're not there yet necessarily in some ways. Although I rely very heavily on Lyft and Uber when I travel for work, especially. New York City. I mean, you don't call an Uber or Lyft in New York City. You just walk out on the street. I mean, there's cabs everywhere. But
you know what? There are times that I still call an Uber and Lyft in the city.
Okay.
There are moments.
Well,
there are moments that I do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Here's a good example. If I want to go home, right?
Yep.
If I want to go back to Queens, back to Bayside,
yeah,
I'll call an Uber.
Yes.
Because I don't want to sit in a stinky taxi.
Right.
For 40 minutes.
Right, but I think this is one of the things that Uber and Lyft could have a positive impact on is the quality of taxis, right? I think when people get used to, I mean, look, I know there are exceptions to this. We've had bad Airbnb experiences, and I guess technically speaking, I've had a couple of bad Uber type experiences. But I mean, as far as like the quality of the vehicle, regardless of what you think of the car, I mean, like the kind of car it is, but the cleanliness of it and whatever, it's always been pretty high. It's always been really good. Taxis is it's like a public urinal with wheels sometimes. Like it's,
you know what it is? It literally, you're not even literally. I do think that the share ride and all that stuff, that model, I don't know how sustainable it's going to be in this decade. I don't know what it evolves to. I know Uber's big plan is to have, self-driving Ubers all around the city. I don't know if that's, in 10 years, Paul, God willing, if we're still doing this, maybe that's the discussion we're having.
Cars or whatever.
Autonomous vehicles. Cars. Yeah, autonomous vehicles. And by the way, there is something to be said because this was the decade of electric cars. It did happen.
That's still in the transition thing, but yeah, it certainly is the decade when it started happening, for sure.
They're affordable. They're limited to get, but it's affordable. Chevy Volt was going to be the answer to this. Right. Fell flat on its face, didn't work out. But Tesla has proven that they're putting out $35,000 vehicles, and now Nissan has one. Luxury brands now have one. Ford has a Mustang SUV now coming out this year for 2020.
The move to self-driving cars is going to be a lot like the move to cloud computing. There's going to be a lot of pushback in the beginning. People, especially in the United States, I bet, because we just don't have the population density.
This is the new manual versus automatic.
Yes, and it's going to be, you are not taking this thing away from me. This is about my freedom, blah, 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 whatever. Like, and there's going to be pushback, and that will last for some period of time, but it's inevitable. And
let's see, how long did the manual versus standard argument last? Right, because obviously it's not as much now. Listen, but
first of all, it didn't end, Andrew.
Years.
I'm not.
You still driving standard, Paul?
No, we don't have a standard right now,
but you were. I mean, you had the Volkswagen.
Well, I have had standards my whole life. Yeah. Oh yeah. I always drove a stick.
Automatic versus standard. I mean, that discussion is.
If you have to commute to work every day, you don't want a stick.
No. Listen, when
a
Chevy
stick
Corvette,
is a luxury for someone who likes to drive and doesn't drive that much.
My father said this once to me, and now it makes sense. He goes, when it's over for manual? When the Corvette's not manual anymore. That's it for manual cars. And you know what? It's not manual anymore. And it's a mid-engine car.
30 years ago, most Porsches sold were automatics. I remember my dad bought a little Volkswagen convertible, and it was like an automatic. I'm like, seriously? What like what? Why do you? I mean, what power is this thing? Bubbles? What do you like? Do you pedal it? Like what? Why would you not get a stick?
Disposable tech. How everything is disposable now. You don't hang on to anything more than 2-3 years.
That's a bad thing, though.
Yeah, that's a thing from this decade that we saw more and more of. People are buying. The fact that people are buying new TVs every 3 years is baffling. Yeah. And I'm not. By the way, I hang on to my TVs. I held on to get a 4K TV. I just got one about 6 months ago.
Right.
This is fascinating how a TV was something you hung on to until it broke. And now you're replacing them every 3 years, or there's a reason to replace them. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying there's a reason now. People are throwing, different standards and different quality improvements.
Well,
that's another big
things
story.
Don't last as long, for one thing, right? I mean, the washing machines, the refrigerators, the TVs, and whatever that my parents had could still be in service today. The stuff that you and I bought as adults, pretty, electronics and things that are electronic in some way. Like we have a Samsung washing machine and dryer, and we just got an Instapot. And the one thing that those things have in common is that they sing little songs.
Yes.
Like when the wash is done, we're treated to a
jingle,
a little melody of some kind. I don't know why it does that, but so that's fun. But I don't think that thing's going to be around in 10 years. I really don't.
Interesting, right? No, definitely not. Yeah. Anything we miss here? Obviously 4K.
So I do. I just to blow through it quickly. There are the things that, like I said, we're kind of at the start of. I don't think they define the decade, but this decade was the time that this started happening. And so we mentioned cord cutting. That was definitely one of them. Wearable computing. Is definitely. And by the way, 10 years from now, we'll be talking about computing being more common. That's embedded in our body somehow. Eye transplants or whatever, ear, inside the ear type stuff, whatever it is under the skin. That will be the
embedded computing.
Embedded, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
And then the beginning of ambient computing through smart speakers, smart displays, smart home technology of all kinds, where you can say to a voice assistant, turn the lights on, or run some routine where lights come on all over your house, the shades go up, the music starts, whatever it is, the heat comes on. This transition is, to me, is like any transition in housing, where things were added after the fact because they were invented after the house was built, like electricity or plumbing. Like
it's my house.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it wasn't built with electricity.
If your house is old enough, I mean, this stuff was retrofitted. Today people are retrofitting, Ethernet, smart switches and lights of all kinds, smart devices of all kinds. The houses of the future, the near future, will be built with that stuff as an integral part, right? And sometimes they still are. I mean, they are already, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of homes are built with Ethernet, right out of the ground or whatever. But I think that's, again, it didn't happen fully, and we're not living in this new age of this stuff, but it's happening. Like it's on the way. That stuff's happening.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I mean, I would just give a quick message or a quick mention to something related to the content stuff we were talking about earlier on with cable TV versus cord cutting and so forth. There's more to life than that, right? We're not always sitting in front of a big screen watching a show with our spouse or whatever. We're out in the world and we listen to like podcasts, like you and I are making a podcast.
Yeah.
Back in the day, radio was just like TV was. You had some number of choices. The quality and reception varied on your location, also the time of day. I always, as a child, you may have had this experience. I always wanted, like, you'd be in the car with your parents or something. You go into a store, and the song comes on the radio that you liked, but then they had to turn off the radio, and you had to go in the store. And I always wanted that song to be ready to play again when I got back. But it was live, and now we have this incredible range of opportunity for content, like audio content, I guess I'll call it. And so whether it's audiobooks or a podcast, and podcasts have evolved in ways that I find incredible. I listen to a lot of like documentary style serial podcasts, which are sort of like to audio what like the Netflix stuff is. You know, they're like high quality, well produced, you know, really well researched, maybe true crime or history or some other kind of documentary type subject. I think that stuff's really cool. I know it's not as, you know, it's not like space technology or whatever, but I think it's an interesting indication of how things that were kind of like nichey, nerdy kind of things have gone mainstream and have really matured and become really interesting for like basically everybody.
Podcast for sure. I definitely put that in the category, right? I'm curious how that changes. I predicted 10 years ago that the story of podcast is not going to be you and me. It's going to be be NBC and CBS and ABC and the big networks.
Yeah, it's heading there,
ripping their teeth. And you know what? That's happened.
It's like when the big breweries buy craft brew companies, right? To get, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, this other thing is taking money away from us.
We should have sold out 10 years ago, Paul.
Remember the idea I had? I still think this is such a freaking fantastic idea. Like, you're watching sports, right? So you're watching like Fox Sports. You want to watch football. Joe Buck is on. I want to murder that guy. I cannot stand him. The sound of his voice makes me just want to like claw my ears out. I want to replace Joe Buck. Actually, I'll just end the sentence there. But what I would like to be able to do, what I think we should be able to do, is have local guys doing what is essentially a podcast. It's like a live riff of the, like they're watching the game too, but they're talking.
Alternate feed.
Yeah. I still think that's like the greatest idea.
Listen, it may happen.
I don't know how that hasn't happened.
Well, I would love that to happen.
How was our national rage at Joe Buck not resulted in alternate broadcasts?
Nobody likes him. He's like the mayor of New York. Nobody likes him, but everybody tolerates it.
I will say the one thing I respect about that guy, and it is literally the only thing, I think it's on his Twitter feed. Like if you go look at him on Twitter, he says his tagline is, "I like every team but yours." It's good.
That's actually really
that's
funny.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, he knows he's an idiot. Perfect. He knows it. All right, guys. That's it for this week. Let's wrap it up. We're going to do What to Talk if you're watching live. I'll continue this discussion with Paul. Maybe we'll do stuff that we don't like from this decade. Things that we absolutely hated. My dog is here. He's hanging out. We'll talk about that. If you're watching live, stay tuned. If not, you could join our Patreon, patreon.com/whatthetech. You could go there. And here. Go. Why don't you go, Spencer? What do you want? There he goes. He's out of here. You could go there and check us out, and we do extra bonus content. For all things Paul, go to therot.com. Paul, I'm going to see you on Thursday, correct?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. It'll be fun. I got a busy day that day. I got a very busy day.
I'm not sure how busy my day is, but
no, but it's definitely incorporated. I'm including you in it, so absolutely love it. Thursday's going to be a fun day. All right, guys, that's it for this week. We'll see you all later. Take care.